Welcome to my presentation. I'm Richard Hartnett from Denver, Colorado. My talk today is called The Evolution and the Emergent Function. It's been a very interesting year for me. In November last year, my doctor called me up and said, well, you need to come in for your annual physical. And so I went in and had a physical, and he was like, I'm not happy about your blood pressure, and we went through a bunch of stuff. And then he said, I want you to come back in, and what we're going to do is we're going to have you talk to a cardiologist. So I talked to the cardiologist. He says, well, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, well, I don't have anything going on. He said, well, you're coming in tomorrow. We're going to do an angioplasty. And for those of you who know what that is, they go through your veins and they sort of explore what's going on in your heart. So, I went in the next day, and Cookie was with me, and they kept wheeling other people in and out, and I was like, why are they waiting for me? You know, why am I last, right? And then it finally came to be my turn, and as they were getting ready to wheel me down the hall, I had this moment of like, maybe I'm not going to make it through this. Maybe this is the end of the line for me. I mean, I don't know if, the likelihood of that is pretty slim, but it was a moment of, gee, this could be it. And that really did not sit well with me, because I felt like there's so much I have left to do. There's so much that I want to accomplish in my life. How dare, whatever, be taking me out of life at this time? I've got too much to do. But it really got me thinking about, what is my purpose? What is it that I want to accomplish in my life? And it also got me wondering about this. Does the Prosperos have the future? Because I really have for a long time been very committed to supporting the realization of the Prosperos teachings in a larger context than just our little community. And I thought a lot about, well, why is it that when I think about who I was back in the day, anybody see that? That's me. Well, back in the day, I don't know. Anyway, back at this time, when I first started to be involved with the Prosperos, I had a vision of, you know how when you're a kid, your parents always say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I never knew the answer to that question until I met Thane. And when I met Thane, I said, that's what I want to be. I want to be an effective teacher of ontology. I want to make spiritual truth effective. How's that go? Somebody say it. Okay, so you guys all know that one. I do too. I just like my brain sometimes goes, ugh. So at any rate, so that was my, that's what I was thinking about back in the day, and that's what I wanted my life to be about. But really it was sort of a long time ago. And it happened in a place not too far away from here. That's when I found the Prosperos. And I have asked myself this question numerous times in my life. Why have I remained committed? Also, what I asked is, why have you been able to stay involved with the Prosperos? And also, the second part of that question is, why is it some people will come to a class and then they disappear? What is it that we have that sustained us, that got us to actually attempt to use translation in RHS? And what came up for me was, when I thought back to this time, what came up for me was that Cosmic Intention Therapy class was the class that really sort of rattled my cage. It was the one that really spoke to me and made me get passionate about the Prosperos. It made me feel like I wanted to be involved with this organization, because I wanted to be involved with the promotion of the Cosmic Intention. And if you really look at everything that Thane taught and everything that Thane developed, that was also, I think, part of his agenda. But I feel sometimes like Cosmic Intention Therapy is sort of like the redheaded stepchild of the family. We don't really talk enough about it, And I really feel like that's something that could really help us to be more effective as an organization, because I think CIT actually gives people other reasons why they would use the tools of RHS and translation. For one thing, the teachings of RHS and translation are about really identifying the unity of all, and it's also about figuring out how to get in alignment with the way the universe really works. So when you translate or RHS, you're not just doing that for your own personal good, you are actually contributing to the transformation of our collective consciousness. And you remember that old story about the 100 monkeys, and one monkey's washing his food and all the other monkeys are like not doing it. And they, after a while, after watching him, they all start to mimic him. And then when they get to 100, a tribe that was not in social contact with this tribe actually started washing their food as well. There's something to be said for the collective consciousness we are all part of actually does work that way. And that the more of us that work on RHS and translation, the more we will make a difference in terms of the transformation of our society. Like the things that Heather was talking about, the eco crisis and the social crisis and the tendency to want to build walls, all of that craziness that is still, it's the last hurrah of the old order. How do we bring those changes about? We bring those about through the process of ontology. So our use of these tools is not just on a personal level, it's on a collective level. Another way to say this would be using RHS and translation will allow each of you to be conscious participants in the evolutionary process. And the whole story of the universe is about evolution. So I've always asked the big questions. Why does the universe exist? What am I supposed to do with my life? And the class I said, like earlier, the class that came closest to answer that was cosmic intention therapy. Now, cosmic intention therapy, I think in a way is a class that really integrates spiritual information as well as scientific information. And that is sort of not something you see very often in our culture. Our culture has a tendency to be really polarized, almost like a black and white between science and mysticism or between science and spirituality. Now, religion actually, or spirituality, can be very helpful to us when we look at the stories because they give us pieces of information about the way we look at our world. Specifically, we live in Western culture that is predominated by Christianity, and Christianity creation myth, the very first thing they talk about is the Garden of Eden. And what the essence of that story is that once we were connected with spirit, but because of certain behaviors, we got disconnected. Well, if you practice translation and you get to the place where you say truth is all there is, and because truth is all there is, it is just a oneness, then what that does is that completely changes that thought. Instead of thinking you are separate from the creative force, it brings you to the place of recognizing you are one with that force. And that means that is available to you. You could say your higher self, or your consciousness above materiality, or your consciousness of consciousness, however you want to call it. That is a part of who you are. Heather in her talk was addressing about how to, that you have access to that. And you can utilize that in taking on any particular challenge. I just did a class not too long ago on translation, and I was very excited about the fact that I had 13 brand new students taking translation. Well, wait on that. I'm not happy with that, even though it's a lot of people, because I was not as effective as I wanted to be in getting those people to practice. Now, some of them took to it like ducks in the water. I actually had one student who is actually very committed to her spiritual growth. In the middle of the class, it was the one that was monitoring the class via Zoom, and the program kept dropping her. So she actually started to use translation during the class to deal with that problem of the technology was dropping her. And you know what happened? It stopped happening. I mean, in a way, I always say this. we teach that the universe is a lawful place. And we're not saying that we bend the laws of the universe by our will or our ego, because that is, what was that thing, the term you used earlier today that was really great? Postmodernism.
Oh, yeah.
That was a really good one. I run into that all the time in the New Age. These people are going, well, I can think whatever I want, and whatever I want, that's the way the universe is going to work. No, that doesn't work. But that kind of craziness is actually being advocated by a lot of philosophies. What we teach in the Prosperos is that if you understand the law and the principle that runs this universe, then you can be in perfect accord with that. If you know how to build a cup, then you can make an infinite variety of cups. If you know how to bake a cake, you can make an infinite variety of cakes. Once you understand the laws and principles, then really creativity is unlimited for you. So there's a paradox. And that's why I have paradox in my Tarot book, or Tarot deck, by the way, because I think it's a really essential concept for people to start thinking about, because paradox says whatever it is that you think is intrinsically separated really is secretly linked on a higher level if you look at it. So there is a link between mysticism and science, but you have to take it to a higher level to get to it. Okay, so religion does give us a lot of answers, and it gives us some hints about how we look at the universe. But today I want to talk about science primarily. And the great gift that science has given to us is they got us past superstition. Because what science says is, we're not going to let superstition rule our behavior. We believe that this universe is lawful. That's a valuable idea. And that what science does, it says, let's go out and figure out what the laws and principles are. And by figuring those things out, we can be in accord with them. That's all well and good. The problem is the approach that science takes is what we call a Cartesian approach. And how Cartesian thinking is the way to look at something is to separate it down into the smallest possible unit you can look at, and then by looking at only that unit, you might be able to figure the truth out, which is good up to a point. But what is needed at this time is sort of 180 degrees away from that. What we need to start thinking about is we need to start thinking holistically. We need to start looking at whole systems of things. And by looking at whole systems and seeing how everything is interconnected, then we start to bring about harmony and oneness. What better organization to teach the world about harmony, oneness, and wholeness than the Prosperos? This is our destiny, I think. This is what we have to offer to the world, is to help science get past that Cartesian approach. Now, I want to walk you through some science stuff because I think it's going to give you some interesting pieces about the way the universe works and what the whole story of evolution has been about. Well, the universe history began with a very special event called the Big Bang. And what the Big Bang was is an explosion of light. Now, this is very interesting. They call this thing the Big Bang. Because bang is the noise, right? What science tells us is the universe began as an explosion of light. So what's there to vibrate? There isn't anything because there was no materialism. It was just light, and we all know that light is not materialistic. So there really wasn't any bang at the beginning. It just literally was an explosion of light. So what do we know about light? Now this is important because this is where everything came from. Light is original or first. Big Bang started with an explosion of light, so light was first. Light is completely free. There was nothing else in the universe except that light that came forth. There was nothing to restrict it or interfere with it. Light was completely free to express itself in every direction imaginable. In fact, what science also tells us about the Big Bang is it's not something that happened 13.6 billion years ago, give or take a few millennium. It is something that is continuing to happen. It's an ongoing process. The universe is continuing to expand. So that thing of something coming out of nothing, because that's what also science says about the Big Bang, is that light seemed to come from nowhere. That process is still going on. So that says the universe is continuing to work on expressing something, expressing itself, That's what it's all about. And also, here's a couple other interesting facts about light. Light is not visible, it's what makes seeing possible. And also remember that light has no mass, no weight, which means it's not material. And light travels at only one speed. Light and time seem to have a strange relationship. If we were able to figure out some way to move something up to or close to the speed of light, you know what happens? Time slows down. So no matter how faster we go, we can't ever seem to get right to that point of getting faster than light. So when they talk about, when Einstein said E equals mc squared, I'm sorry, I'm going to tell you I think he got that one wrong. Because I don't think there's any speed faster than the speed of light. However, we'll say this, what is right about that equation is he's saying energy and mass are the same thing. That's an interesting realization. Light and time enter to the universe together, and life expresses itself as a whole. What we say about light is it's a waveform. And when you have a waveform, you have a positive and negative half, can you guys see that, of a wave, right? And that's also really interesting in a way because it is an expression of a polarity. Not a duality, a polarity. If it was a duality, you can have a separation between the positive and the negative, or one could exist without the other. That's another very important truth that we need to get across, is that the universe is always an expression of wholeness. Truth is either so or it's not. What is so is true, and that is what expresses. Okay? Just like waveforms. So what happened after the big light? Well, the next thing that happens is the subatomic, because, well, if it was all light in the beginning, so there wasn't, all of that subatomic stuff wasn't there. So what do we know about subatomic? Well, it's the realm of the weird. It's got a lot of different things like quarks, which are up, down, strange, truth, beauty, and photons, which are little units of light, and then you also have bosons. And then, of course, you have electrons, protons, neutrons, which make up atoms, which are going to be coming next. And then you also have leptons or gluons, and then my favorite, hardons. Oh, I'm sorry, I mispronounced that. It's hadrons. Those are very hard to find. They're very elusive these days. So the subatomic realm is a realm of quantum physics. And what we know about quantum physics is, or in the subatomic realm, is that what's going on there is when we observe what's going on, sometimes things appear to be waves, and other times things appear to be particles. Now, from a materialistic point of view, a scientist will say, well, it can't be both. And I say, why not? Why is it not both? It is very possible that what's going on the subatomic level is light is coalescing into the different pieces that make up the subatomic level, which make it possible for the next thing to happen, which are atoms. Subatomic follows light, but it's different from light because it is both wave and particles. And also out of that subatomic realm, you have forces that start to emerge. Out of the unity of light starts to come the diversity of subatomic form. Whereas light was completely free and unrestrained, in the nuclear realm, material is starting to be bound and limited in its expression. Now, there's this very famous experiment that people do in quantum physics. It's called the photon experiment. Hopefully I'm not going to put you guys all to sleep. It's a pretty simple thing when you really listen to what's going on. Basically what they did is like if you imagine this light source being projected through a slit, what you would get is a dispersion of light, much like what you're seeing there, like a diffuse circle. So what they did is they made two slits, and they projected the light through it, and they were expecting to have two sort of overlapping circles like this, but that's not what happened. What happened was, look at the lower right corner, you see those bars? That's the way the light started to express on the subatomic realm. And so they said, well, that's really weird. Why is it doing that? Well, the truth of the matter is that light is a waveform. And what they figured out was that the waveforms coming from between those two slots were interfering with each other, which is why it came out as bands as opposed to, a continuous circle of things. Well, that worked up to a certain point, except then they did something really strange. They started to look at it and say, okay, what happens if we put a detector in this little experiment to see where the photons go through? And when they put the detector in there, the photon said, sorry, we're not going to do that waveform thing anymore. We're going to do, just particles. And so the diffusion pattern became the circle again. What? Why is it when the detector is there, it was a circle, but when it was not there, it was the bars? Sometimes the light appears to be wave, other time it appears to be particle. But what was different? What was different was the scientists were observing by using those detectors, which is to say that when the scientists were looking, the light said, we're going to do something different. Now what does that tell you? It says on some very strange fundamental level, light is actually consciousness. Which of course scientists was like, well, wait a minute, the universe is just a big machine. That can't possibly be. But there's no other explanation. And if you remember that light is the source of the entire universe, where does that leave us? It leaves us with the entire universe as consciousness. So is there not a place for a school that talks about the fact that we are all one consciousness?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, there is. Yeah, so some of the stuff I've already covered, so I'm just sort of scanning through here. Okay, so as I said, when you think about light being the beginning of the universe, and that the way that light operates, it operates as if it is consciousness, then whatever is going on in the universe is the intention of the creative force of the universe. The creative force of the universe has some sort of intention in terms of the way it puts things together. Light came first, and that made it possible of the formation of the subatomic. The subatomic is what we would call the emergent function of light. And what do I mean by an emergent function? It's like you gather things together, and then something unpredictable synergistically emerges. Like if you put together a bunch of ingredients to make a cake, and you treat it in the right way, this unpredictable thing happens, you get a cake, right? So emergent function happens whenever things are gathered together and the energy all works together in order to bring forth something new. Now why is that important? We've got to come back to that question. The subatomic is synergistic, meaning what emerged was unpredictable than light. Subatomic is actually the beginning of the material universe. Before the subatomic, there was just light, and light's just a wave, it's not material. Now, the next thing we know is that atoms are made up of subatomic particles, and then this means that atoms are the emergent function of the subatomic. Now, what makes atoms different from the subatomic level is that when scientists look at things on the subatomic level, they talk about electrons and photons and all these other things, but they can't exactly say, well, see that thing right there, that's an electron. They can talk about the influence of an electron, but they cannot say specifically for sure, well, there's here the electron moving his way around the nucleus of an atom. You cannot predict things. Things don't start to have identity until you get to the atomic level of things. Atoms are the place where we start to clearly have a sense of identity. How do we know that? The periodic table, in which you have 100 different elements that are all distinct from one another, so they specifically have identity. Now, following atoms, or what you might say, is that molecules are the emergent function that is made possible by atoms. Now, what atoms are, as we talked about, an individual unit, and we don't see those individual units. The only place where we actually see anything is the molecular kingdom. Even if you're looking at a plant or an animal or an atom or anything, you're always looking at molecules. You don't see atoms. You actually don't see life. You could, if you looked at a picture of an animal that was dead versus a picture of an animal that was alive, that might look identical. You can't see the life, because life is another order of expression, but it's not visible to your eyes per se. And try to get your mind around that idea. It says that life is an emergent function from the molecular kingdom, and it is something less material. There is approximately 100 types of atoms. Each is separate and distinct from the others, but there are countless kinds of molecules. It's almost like atoms are letters and molecules are words. And the molecular library of molecules, it goes through a whole lot of different expressions in terms of how it is in the world. You can have monoatomic, which means just a big collection of individual atoms brought together. And when you do that, like for instance metal, what will happen is there'll be an emergent function that will happen with metal. You bring a bunch of gold together, you start to get characteristics like malleability. You can pound gold very, very thin. Or metals will conduct electricity. Those things don't happen with individual atoms, but they do when you have a collection of them. And there's also then different levels of order in the molecular kingdom. There's called ionic compounds, which are salts, bases, and acids. Non-functional compounds, which are paraffin or methane fuels. It's like oil, all the way up to asphalt. And then you have functional compounds, which are combinations of combinations. So functional compounds are like combinations of different types of atoms. And then you have what's called polymers, which are chains of molecules. And then you have functional polymers, which are chains with side chains. And then you actually have the final order within the molecular kingdom, which is what we call DNA, RNA, and viruses. And we know that that's a very special kind of ways that molecules are joined together. And it's actually almost like a little computer or something where information is stored that makes possible what? Life. All life has DNA of some sort or another. So this is another interesting thing that you start to see, is that when you get to the last form of any of the different kingdoms, and what I mean by kingdoms is different levels of organization. Each of these levels I've talked about up till now are very distinct from each other. Light is very distinct from subatomic particles. Subatomic particles are very distinct from atoms. Atoms are very distinct from molecules. And what do you think might come next? Well, we could say that what we've been talking about up to this point is what you would call involution. From light, which is basically not material, consciousness has descended down through the subatomic to the atomic, and then eventually to the molecular kingdom. Molecules make possible something completely new and different, what we call life. Now, how is life different from, say, molecules or atoms? Life demonstrates awareness of environment. Okay? It is consciousness, conscious of its environment. The most simple form of life is a single cell. And that single cell actually does have the capacity to interact with its environment, to sense nutrients or things around it that it needs, and to mobilize itself to the point where it can take those nutrients in order to sustain itself. Life is self-sustaining. Life is able to interact with its environment, and cell life, and therefore all life, has an autopoietic network that repairs itself. Now what I mean by that is that one of the characteristics of light is it's self-contained, and within that self-containment it actually has the ability to regenerate. If something gets damaged, it repairs itself. And so cells, which are the most, actually it's the most common form of life there is. People think, well, there's all these different diverse forms, but the most common thing that exists in terms of life is simple cells. And that's very interesting. Life emerged first as a single cell in a plant life. So the first form of life, the very first thing that happens was plants. And plants began as a single cell. That would be like microscopic bacteria. And then from there you go to many cells joining together, such as algae or seaweed or kelp. And then you go to many tissues, and that's something like mosses. Tissues are, they're specialized, and then you have many tissues combining with other tissues, and you start to have specialized functions, many different kinds of specialized cells. So as life evolves, even within the plant kingdom, what you start to see is things gain in complexity. The other thing I'm hoping you start to notice is that everything seems to happen in groups of sevens. You can group the periodic table of atoms into 7 distinct groups. You can group molecules, as I just talked about, into 7 distinct groups. Same thing is true of plants. The next variation of plants is what they call segmentation, and that's the thing that makes possible huge growth like trees, because there are certain cells that specialize in this process of segmentation that make large plant life possible. And then from there you have what are called gymnosperms. Now what gymnosperms are is they are plants that make seeds. And those seeds increase the range of a plant, because a plant pretty much is just stuck in one spot, right? But when they start to make seeds, those seeds can be picked up by the wind or by water or something and be carried to a different place. So the plant life actually has the possibility of expanding its sphere of influence. And then you have the final form of the plant kingdom, which are called angiosperms. Now angiosperms are like apples or strawberries. They are seeds that are contained within some sort of soft outer surface, like the apple. And then what happens is that an animal will eat the apple, and in part of the process of eating the sweet meat of the apple, it actually takes in the seeds, and then it goes on its way, and maybe 5 miles down the road, the seeds come out the other end. So that even increases the range of plants even further. But the thing that really blows my mind away is, how do those plants evolve with this idea that they can actually come up with something and interact with the next level of order with animals? That, to me, is an indication of there is some sort of cosmic intention working. Because we start to notice these interactions, like molecules organizing into DNA and RNA. These kingdoms are distinct, but there's a lot of overlap, which is to say that life is involved with something much greater in the process of evolution. Now, one of the things that happened with plants is that plant life really flourished, and it actually came to the point where it was the most dominant life form on the globe. And one of the things that plants do is it makes oxygen as part of their interaction with the environment. Now that was fine, except that excessive amounts of oxygen started to create a crisis, because there was so much oxygen in the planet that the plants were actually starting to suffocate because they couldn't take in any carbon dioxide because oxygen was taking everything in. So that really was an ecological crisis. Now I was talking to Al about this yesterday. I went to an event sponsored by Barbara Marx Hubbard back in the day when we were in Santa Monica, and one of the things she talked about was that evolution, very often, what happens is before there's a quantum leap forward in the evolutionary development, there's a crisis. Things get out of balance or things get stressed. And those stressors actually are a catalyst that bring forth the next thing that needs to happen in order for evolution to happen. And this little diagram here is Barbara's diagram. And it's like the idea is that something new comes forward and it flourishes and it gets to a point where it sort of reached its maximum potential, and then it starts to fall. Imagine the crisis about there's no air and you can't breathe the CO2 anymore. And then out of that comes that quantum leap up to the next thing, like from plants to animals. So then we come to the animal kingdom. And what the animal kingdom did is it took in oxygen and released carbon dioxide. So there became this really nice symbiotic relationship between animals and plants. And animals goes through 7 stages as well. The simplest form of animal life is a protozoa, which is a single cell. Then you have sponges, which are many cell. And then you have this next one, which is choleriates. And what's unique about these guys is they actually create an organ within themselves that has a specialized function. Then you have mollusks, which have many different organs. So if you think about different organs starting to evolve within animals, and you start to realize there's all these different things that happen, like specialization of digestion, specialization of vision, of hearing, of touch, all these different things, and what all of those different capacities do is it increases the animal's ability to interact with its environment. In other words, it's the expansion of consciousness. The expansion of consciousness is not something just limited to humanity. It's been going on. It's the larger story. And then you have aeneas, which are a chain of cells. And then you have arthropods, which are chains with side chains. And then you have chordata. Now, chordata is a word that includes mammals and reptiles and birds. It is sort of a significant group. And the key thing about the chordatas is that this is where animals really reach their potential. And that is the thing that makes animals different from plants is mobility. Plants are pretty much stuck in one spot and they can grow, but they really aren't mobile, whereas animals are able to interact with their environment because they're mobile, and that means their awareness is expanded. So here's some of the key differences between plants and animals. Plants create their own energy. Animals need some sort of outside source for energy. Plants are in a fixed position where animals are free to move. Plants have a form that's mostly fixed, although it continues to grow, like a tree can continue throughout its entire life to keep getting bigger and bigger. Whereas animals they have this flexibility, but they reach a point where they're not going to grow anymore. Their size will reach a certain plateau, what we would call maturity. So animals gain mobility, and they gain increased specialized organs which allow very specialized functions such as digestion, vision, smell, hearing, etc. Animals demonstrate an increase in intelligence, demonstrated by their ability to interact with the environment. And that means that they are able to make choices, they are able to remember, and that they have emotions. So that's a pretty significant difference between them and plants, which are pretty much, they're aware of their immediate environment and they interact with the sun, but they don't really demonstrate too much choice. So you start to see, as you go up the other side of the evolutionary scale, from plants to animals to whatever's next, there seems to be an expansion of consciousness demonstrated by clear thinking, and not just that, but consciousness conscious of consciousness. So evolution has often been described as survival of the fittest, but evolution is a much larger story. Life is amazing in its diversity. The most common life form is the cell. And cells join together in order to create those more sophisticated, evolved life forms, like the different organs within an animal or within a plant. And so one of the things that's really interesting is that this idea of survival of the fittest is that there's a whole attitude of competition and dominance and submission, and one wins and one loses. But yes, we have predators in our world, but the most common life form that exists are cells. And cells, more often than not, engage in symbiotic relationships. Now, the easiest place to see that is to think about, you guys are all digesting your lunch right now, right? Well, yes you are, and yes, not exactly you are. Your bacteria that lives in your gut isn't really you, it's a separate life form, and that life form digests your food. So there's this cooperative relationship between these two life forms. So this is an important piece, because if cells are the most diverse, most widespread life form, and that they function on the basis of a symbiotic cooperation, that tells us that that is more in alignment with the cosmic intention than that survival of the fittest attitude. And the other thing to look at also is that when you look around the globe and you start to look at life, what you start to see is that life is amazing in its diversity. You find life in places where you would not think, like the inside of a volcano, or underneath the Antarctic, or all sorts of strange places, which is to say that the will for life to express itself goes well beyond just this idea of competition. So we could ask this question, is evolution finished, or is it an ongoing expression of the universe? Now, to think about evolution, we have to look at the whole story. You have to look at each chapter or each kingdom. Now, every one of these different groups is what they call a kingdom because they're very distinct from each other. Light is distinct from subatomic particles. Subatomic particles are different from atoms. Atoms are different from molecules. Plants are different from molecules. Animals are different. These are each kingdoms that are very distinct. And that's how we can come up with these categorizations. And if we look at the sequence, we see that light organizes itself into the subatomic, and then that organizes itself into atoms, and then that organizes itself into molecules. Now you might call this involution, from absolutely free light to molecules which are totally constrained, and then from there molecules start to be the place where life emerges as plants, and then animals. Now, you notice that there's sort of like a mirroring effect here. And the idea is that there are 7 kingdoms. Now, we know that 7 is often thought of as a magical number. There must be a reason for this, and that is 7. And also, if you go back to all those different things I was talking about, there's a whole lot of material for me to try to cover today. When you go back over the molecules and the atoms, every single one of those kingdoms had 7 subgroups. That's an interesting phenomenon as well. So if you get to the place where you realize, or you think about animals, or the core data is sort of like the last stage of animal form, well then there must be something else that's going to come after animals. And we may have the arrogance to think that it's man, but really man is just another animal. But what is true about man is that within us we have the capacity to bring forth the next kingdom. Something completely new and different. Now, there's another interesting phenomenon that happens between the right side and the left side of this sequence. And that is light is completely free. Subatomic particles are a little bit more constrained. They have what we would call 2 degrees of freedom. And then you have atoms, which have 1 degree of freedom. Now atoms, the way atoms express their freedom is that they're able to take in energy and release energy spontaneously without some sort of external influence. Now light has freedom in this, subatomic particles have the freedom in the sense of sometimes they're particles, sometimes they're waves. That's one of the ways that light is. So then you get to molecules, and molecules are completely free. Completely constrained. They don't have any freedom. But then you start to go to plants, and plants start to regain freedom. They have the ability to grow. That's 1 degree of freedom. So there's a mirroring effect going on between atoms and plants. And then animals have 2 degrees of freedom. Why? Because they can move on 2 different planes. They have mobility. So they have 2 degrees of freedom, just like subatomic has 2 degrees of freedom. So whatever that final kingdom would be, which I have there as a question mark, is going to be something that mirrors light. Light is completely free, so that last kingdom must also be completely free. So the final stage is going to have 3 degrees of freedom. It's going to be like light. It's going to be free of any outside restraint. Like light, it's going to be free in location. It's going to be everywhere equally present. Gee, guys, what's that sound like? Anything we might be familiar with? Are we translators? Do we not teach that truth is everywhere equally present? Yes, we do. Do we not teach that light is whole? So whatever this final kingdom will be, it will also be an expression of wholeness. Light also, remember I said that light and time sort of came in at the same time? Whatever this final kingdom will be, it will also be a kingdom that is timeless. The final stage in the evolutionary process is not an individual being or life form. It's like light. It's like the energy of consciousness, but it is enlightened consciousness. So isn't that interesting? We talk about enlightenment. Light is in that word. When people talk about enlightenment, what do they say? They say they look at their world and everything appeared to be one. Hello, translation, here we are again. We're back to where we are as an organization. We teach this idea, we teach this discipline, we teach this principle that really establishes in our consciousness that sense of wholeness, that sense of oneness, that sense of completeness. When you're working with translation, you're working with truth. And if you think about the words that describe light and the words that describe truth, they're very, very similar. Light is timeless, it's beyond time, so is truth. Truth is not contained in any moment, it is eternal. Truth is whole, light is whole. It doesn't express as half forms, it expresses it as complete waveforms. Now, how do we get to this place where we know that consciousness? We get to that place through the practice of ontology, which means practice of RHS and translation. We're getting to what we're after is getting to that place of knowing the oneness of consciousness that is everywhere equally present. So we go back to those big questions. Why does the universe exist? What are we supposed to do with our lives? Does the Prosperos have a future? And the answer that I come up with is the universe has this cosmic intention to know itself, to know truth. What better discipline to know the nature of the universe than RHS and translation? What are we supposed to do with our lives? To become conscious participants in the evolution of consciousness, which is how the universe comes to know itself, because that's what the universe's intention is. Does the Prosperos have a future? Well, guys, that's a good question, isn't it? When we gather together, what happens is something emerges with us as well. And the emergent function of us is that we bring forth that kind of collective thinking of oneness and wholeness and completeness. The other thing that happens when we gather together, we bring forth all of our thoughts, all of our awarenesses of Mary Ridley, Thane Walker, Norma Keller, and all Elizabeth Parker Betty Cuff. Was a lady who was very, very helpful to me when I was first started out in Prosperos. And Billy Talmadge and Helen Sandos and anybody else want to throw some names? Perry Dickey, thank you. Claire Gold. And here's what I'm saying to you. You know, sometimes I hear some of you new guys say, God, I wish I would have been around back in the day and really got to know Thane. Well, let me tell you something about Thane. Thane was scary. He was damn scary. I will never forget going to a Aloha retreat and having a complete meltdown, totally freaking out, and going, I gotta get out of here. I literally was like, I gotta get out of here. But I was in Palm Springs. It's like, how do I get home? I don't know how the hell I can get out of here. I gotta get out of here, I gotta get out of here. So we started the next day, and I'm like, you know, smart, figured it out. So he says, Richard, get in here. So I go into this office, and he goes, Tom, come over here. And Tom Charlesworth, he says, get this guy's money, and give him his money back, and get him the hell out of here. And I'm in the room, and Tom's like doing this thing, being all nervous, and shuffling papers around, because Tom was smart, he knew what was going on. And Thane says, you get the hell out of here, and don't you ever come back to the service center, and don't you ever come around the Prosperos again. And I'm like, okay, just let me go. And he's standing in the door. So there's no place for me to go. Finally he says, I said, what do you want? Just tell me what to I did the work. It was a profound experience. Now I'm going to tell you, I'm sad to say, there isn't anyone in this room who's going to do that for you. Because it's just not who we are. But what I will tell you is, I gave up the idea a long time ago of trying to be thin. But what I've decided to do is to be the best Richard I can be. And Richard is committed to being here for you, to talk with you, to work with you, to hear your story, to support you in your story, and the realization that you are nothing but consciousness. Conscious of consciousness. You are the realization of enlightenment. You are the realization of the light. But to do that, you got to be willing to risk. When I thought my life was over, I said, what have I left undone? How am I going to change that? What am I going to do different? And what I said was, I have to be willing to do whatever is called upon me to do, even if it's teaching in class, and to be humiliated because half the students form in a rebellion, which is literally what happened in my translation class, and booked out of the room. And figure out what I got to do to reach those people before they take translation. Because you know what, guys? You know this because you are ontology practitioners. You know if you work with RHS in translation, it does change your world. It changes your consciousness, which changes your world. Change your worldview, the world that you view will change. Not that you bend the laws and principles of the universe to your personal egotistical will, but you change your consciousness, you're changing your awareness, and then you're seeing things for what they really are. You're seeing the truth. You're seeing things for the way it is. But that is a hard thing to embrace, because it means you're responsible. Can't blame your parents anymore. Can't blame your teacher. Can't blame the scoutmaster who did it with you in the bushes. I'm sure. You know, you just have to accept. And I think that these students that I had saw that. And it freaked them out. So I sort of think this is where Slyman comes in. Because if you work on working with people, and you help them to see that this practice is what is needed in our society. This practice is about tearing down walls, not building walls. It's about working on consensus building and cooperation as opposed to being adversarial. It is about expansion of consciousness, right? And RHS in translation, you're contributing to something greater than just your own little pathetic self. You're contributing to the evolution of consciousness. You do this practice, you're like the monkeys. You're contributing to a change in the collective. When enough people start thinking holistically instead of dualistically, that's when we're going to start to find that our society will really change, and we'll start to resolve these ecological crises because we're working together as a whole. An individual cell doesn't worry about losing its identity when it participates in being something, part of something greater than just itself. It holds on to its integrity while it's part of being a plant or an animal. It still is whole and complete within itself. It's whole within whole. That's what Ken Wilber calls holons. And just getting that idea across would be valuable to people. Because today when we start to talk about collective, what's the first thing that comes out is, oh my God, it's socialism. It's socialistic, you know, we're going to forget the damn communists are taking over again, you know. Or the United Nations, it's all a conspiracy, you know. It's like, that kind of thinking is just ridiculous. When you do this work, you can use it to meet any challenge in your life, but you're also doing it to bring about change within your society, and you will become a more conscious participant in evolution. Enlightenment may begin with just one person. Thane is the most enlightened person I ever met. And, you know, it was an honor and a privilege to be in his presence. He wasn't always scary. In fact, one of my favorite memories of Thane is there was I don't know what it was, but maybe it was Clapsaddle Corral or something, but he did this thing called Princess Papuli. Did this song. Anybody remember this? Yeah. And so he's up there and he's going, Princess Papuli has plenty of papayas. She loves to give them away. Get it? Papuli, papayas. Gives them away, you know. So it was sort of a little pun and it was a little bit funny. But I was in the front row and I looked and what I saw in his face was, I will give you the best that I have. I will give you to the nth degree. I will give you the last of who I am in order to participate and serve in the evolution of consciousness. Thing was enlightened. The light shone brightly in Thing. And I think sometimes when we get together as a family, and I think literally that's what the Prosperos is at this point, is we are a family. And when we get together and we start speaking our truth, and we're willing to risk with each other, we're willing to be vulnerable, which is what we're asking you to do this afternoon, is come to the group meetings with a willingness to speak about the places where you're stuck, the places where you're in pain, the places where you don't understand things. By your willingness to work together, we bring forth that collective thinking. As the old saying goes, when two or more are gathered in my name, I am there among them. So you want to know Thing? You can know Thing. You want to know Billy? You can know Billy. Because Thing and Billy and Claire and all of them reside within our hearts. And we will and can share that with each other. For us to move beyond just being a family, we have to start to find a way to be a community. And what a community is something larger, where not everybody knows everybody. A community is a place where truth is an effective force by different parts, but those parts are all connected by principle. From there, the fourth stage would get to the place where we actually had an enlightened government. Boy, there's a concept. And then from there, start to move into a collective, in which you have multiple governments actually starting to talk in an enlightened way. And actually you do see some signs of that. The Europe, with its Commonwealth, that was an effort to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't have a war with each other every 20 years and kill off the youth of our culture. Maybe we should figure out a way to be cooperative, to be synergistic with each other, so something greater can emerge. And Europe actually started to really make some progress by working together. Eventually, we're going to get to that final stage, which is for us, which would be an enlightened world in which the whole globe is enlightened. And then beyond that, we get to the place where we have an enlightened universe. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't you like to be part of that? I know I would.
Well, maybe just settle for the fourth one. I'd be good with that.
Whenever two or more are gathered in His name, He's there among them. Be willing today to share your stories. Yeah, I've gone through all this. Okay. And we're going to have a little music for you to listen to end. And that's my presentation. If you have any questions, come see me. Oh, real quick. Sorry, I meant to do this earlier. I brought copies of my book, Tarot, and I brought my Tarot deck if anybody's interested in that. Also, let me get the music queued up here so we can listen to music while we're doing this. Come on. I had it queued up earlier.
Is it the same one, Calvin? Is it the same?
I don't know.
Okay. This is my
Hold
life.
on. Here we go.
Okay.
I'm almost there. Okay, here we go. Go ahead. Okay. If you want to know source material for my talk today, The Reflexive Universe by Arthur Young. That's the whole idea of evolution. This is my second copy I'm still working on. And the other one is Fritz Capra, The Web of Life. So, thank you all for your attention today. Let's have fun this afternoon.